I am Russell Robinson, everybody. I am the director of the Key Undergraduate Leadership Program. And I want to shout out Jennifer and Daniel, but also our director, Patrick Malone, for all that we're doing at Key to help public servants. We started this 4-part series on federal leadership, Decoded. In July, we started this 4-part series with Why Do I Want to Lead? This is our second session where we talk about SES reform. October 29th, we're going to do a session on imposter syndrome. And then we're going to close it out December 3rd with a focus on what's my purpose. But we wanted to get into SES reform and a little background. I mean, I think there's a lot happening both on this side of the Atlantic and Hannah's side of the Atlantic. But the conversation about SES reform has been happening for several years due to the pressure, the changing nature of the SES role, different generations in the workplace, rapid changing technology, and of course, the political influence. So we're going to have a good discussion. I'm going to go ahead and joining me, I've got the lovely Hannah Keenan, and she's the associate director with the Institute for Government in the UK. And this guy who is sitting on his hands because tomorrow is his birthday, Marcus Hill, president of the Senior Executive Association. So if both of you can briefly give a brief background on yourself and what IFG and SEA do. Ladies first, Hannah.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. It is lovely to be with you. If you can't tell from my accent and my incredibly English cottage background, I'm joining you from England. As Russell has said, I'm an associate director at the Institute for Government here. We are an independent, non-partisan think tank that exists to try and make government more effective. My research here focuses on the civil service as a whole, including what we call the senior civil service, but your equivalent of the senior executive service, and how to improve and reform that workforce, which is a conversation that's been ongoing for a very long time here. Prior to that, I spent the last 10 years in the civil service, most of that in the Cabinet Office, running all sorts of bits of cross-government, ministerial, political decision-making, including our weekly cabinet meeting. So that's me.
All right, and I'm Marcus Hill. I'm the president of the Senior Executives Association, which is a nonpartisan professional association that represents the interests of career senior leaders to include career senior executives, GS 15s through 12s. The organization has been in existence for over 4 decades, and basically our role is to support good government initiatives, promote good government, and represent the interests of our constituents. For myself, I retired about 4.5 years ago after about 38 years of federal civil service, about 16 of those as a career civil servant, and I'm also a retired military reserve officer.
Awesome, folks. So let me do my professor thing and ground what we're doing in some research. So Deloitte Insights put out an article in 2019, fascinating because it was pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd, pre this worldwide shift to the right politically going on. That was called A New Mindset for Public Service Leadership. And it talked about these 5 aspects that were needed for public service leaders. They need to be more creative, more resilient, navigating blurred boundaries, this ability to be agile, navigate ambiguity, and the ability to assess skills throughout their enterprise. So what I want to start off with for both of you, and we'll go Marcus first and then Hannah, is why do you think there is a need for senior executive service, US, senior civil service in the UK, this need for SES reform?
Well, thank you for the question. And just from my personal experience, which sort of captures about 38 years of serving within the federal system, there's a continuous need as the world evolves to update our systems and processes and those sorts of things. And so in total, I don't think, at least with the United States government, we do a good job keeping up with the times as we continue to evolve as a country. If you look at a lot of our existing regulations and policies, many of those go back to the 1940s, really. And so every administration, I think, takes their stab at attempting to do some type of reform, and they do it in a typically they do it in a unilateral way. And so I believe that as we continue to mature as a country and evolve, that it's critically important that the government that serves the American people keeps up with those times. And so we have to invest in our career civil service to ensure that we're in a position to best provide the services that the American people expect of their government as it relates to serving our interests and needs. So there's just a need to prioritize at this point in time reforming various aspects of the federal government to include the senior executive service.
I'd echo so much of what Marcus says. I was struck by you saying, it's about providing what the American people expect of their government, and it's the same over here, right? You're in public service to provide for the public. And I think we can sometimes lose sight of that in this reform conversation. It's relatively easy, and I think it's also right to look at the parts of the civil service that need to be reformed, that need to change, that need to keep up with a much more fragmented media landscape, with really quite wicked problems that we're finding very hard to resolve. But I think underneath all of that, we need to remember that on the whole, we have a civil service that is delivering to the people, and that's why we do it. That's why we do this reform, so that the civil service, in partnership with politicians, can deliver for the country. So I think I'd bring it all back to public service.
So it's fascinating. When I teach, I talk about I'm 56 years old. So every president who has campaigned in my lifetime has campaigned under, it doesn't matter which party, has campaigned under the premise that government is bad, right? And I think part of the challenge with what I see for especially career senior executives, UK, US, would be this fact that the story that is being told oftentimes is that we are the problem. And where, Hannah, you mentioned this fragmented media landscape, is fascinating when you look at, I was looking at research from Pew Research Center that basically said the American public views career leaders, career government leaders, in a higher regard than politically appointed leaders, but the lack of trust in career leaders is the lowest it's been in 15 years. So the question is, when we look at civil service, senior executive reform, how do we work to change the story so that the users of goods and services, whether it's in the US or UK, understand that civil servants aren't the problem the way they are being portrayed? And start with Hannah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're seeing the same thing here in terms of trust in politicians, but also trust in the civil service has declined since, I think, pretty steadily since 2019, regardless of which way you vote and which way you lean. We're actually in a very different context politically, to state the obvious. But we have a left of centre Labour government here that came into power in 2024 in summer, who are quite clear on the need for an active state, that the state and the civil service as part of that can be a force for good. So we have a political environment where people our politicians are actively saying that. So I think worth bearing that in mind as we go through. The bit that I wanted to pick up on, Russell, is about this sense of delivering for the people and delivering for individual users. And I think it's less that individuals and the public don't trust civil servants to tell the truth or to be ethical or to be honest. It's almost a sense of apathy that, are you actually going to get anything done? Do I have any confidence that there will be a delivery on the ground? We hear this from politicians as well. The way it gets described over here is, I pull a lever and nothing happens. The civil service can't deliver on the thing that I want it to. And part of that is just that we're trying to deliver some really, really complex things to like very, very difficult cross-cutting problems. But I think this is part of your need for reform. So there's, I would say, two things in there. One is around the competence and skills of your civil service. And I think that's to do with some of the structural incentives that we have. Certainly over here, we see civil servants moving jobs very regularly because they are incentivized to do that because of the way that we structured our workforce. And the other side of that is a bit more creativity in the civil service to be able to move out of some of the bureaucracy that and the process that civil servants can find themselves trapped in. It's not that they want to be part of that, but again, people respond to the incentives that they face. And so what you can end up with is a quite sluggish organization in parts, obviously not across the board. And I think that really damages the trust that both politicians and the public have that the civil service can deliver for them.
So let me ask you a follow-up before we go to Marcus. Is it that when you pull a lever, nothing happens? Or when you pull a lever, you don't see what happens? Or you don't know that something has happened? Because those are two different things.
And it's probably more complex than that again, right? I'm sure there are parts of the civil service where you pull a lever and lots of stuff happens, but not what you were expecting, right? Perhaps you say into a train a very helpful set of processes that tells you that actually there's a really big legal risk to doing this that you might want to be aware of before you go ahead and do it. But in some places, I think you'll see that politicians, and this is consistent, right? This isn't a new thing that only this set of politicians has found, but you say that you want X to happen, but actually, because our civil service doesn't have, very, very clear leadership, because we've got these different sets of departments that often might face slightly different structural incentives, the message doesn't always come through quite as clearly as it could.
Marcus.
Yeah, I sort of get a little emotional when we talk about this topic based on the almost 4 decades of my life that I invested in public service as a career civil servant. And first and foremost, I really believe that we've lost again sight of, as Hannah mentioned, the role of government, and it's to serve the people. So I think about American citizens that volunteer to serve through civil service, American citizens' interest as it relates to carrying out the missions of these various agencies. So when I see politicians taking shots at career civil servants and the government, I take it personal because we are they as it relates to American citizens serving American citizens. Not only are we serving, we're receiving the services that we're rendering. So in my mind, there is a genuine need for that acknowledgement and the prioritization by both parties or all parties within government to prioritize in a bipartisan way an effort to really reform the government and the governmental system. It's irresponsible in my opinion to use the federal system to promote your political ideology. So in my mind, I've served many different administrations, both Republican and Democratic administrations as a career civil servant. And it was very clear to me that my role was to support the administration's priorities in terms of achieving those priorities. They're legal and ethical. My job was to support and figure out ways how to get it done. I don't think most career civil servants have an issue with that, and I think most of them understand that, and I think most of them do just that. But to sort of present that it's more of a problem than not that they don't do that, in my mind, that's just serving a political interest.
Yeah. So
It's,
so go ahead, Hannah.
I just wanted to pick up on this because it's really interesting, Marcus, what you say, and curious about your views on what we're experiencing here in the UK, which is that we saw some attacks from the previous Conservative government here on the civil service. A couple of ministers saying that the civil service was politicized, that was activist civil servants trying to stop them achieving some of their policy objectives. So there's the same attacks you just described. The Labour government that came in last year has had a very, very different rhetoric, or at least started with a very different rhetoric, and started with this very open, I can't remember the exact words, but the new Prime Minister here talked about, we respect you, civil servants, we have your backs, we're here to work with you. Really positive reset in tone and relationship. And we've seen that really work in some places and some bits of the civil service. But we've also seen over the past year this new Labour government start to be frustrated. And they're not using, then it's not attacks on political impartiality, and it's not attacks on civil servants individually, but it's frustration with the system as a whole. And I think that's really indicative of this need. That's the driving force of reform, right? It doesn't, from where I'm sitting, it doesn't really matter whether you've got what flavor of government you have, to a certain extent, within reason, obviously. But the same frustrations are coming out. And there's a sense where actually there was a real moment here last year of political will to change some of the stuff in the civil service and to do some of this hard reform. And it feels like it was a missed opportunity, and the civil service didn't quite rise up to meet it, and politicians didn't quite stick with it in the same way. So we're trying here to get that back, but very interested in reflections on kind of this slightly different experience.
Yes, similar. We're experiencing similar challenges. I don't think that I think that our last window that I've experienced in terms of doing true government reform was probably back in the early 90s. And it seems like from that point forward that we've just missed opportunities because it hasn't been a bipartisan priority to reinvest time and attention into reforming the system. So no, to your point, no matter who's in charge, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or other, it's all about, in my mind, it's all about leadership. It starts at the top. The leadership, the leader sets the tone. So my hope is that whether no matter who's in charge as it relates to a political party, there will be some interest or recognition that the system needs to be reformed. And the wise way to go about doing that is to do it in a bipartisan, inclusive nature, because neither party has all the answers. Neither party has the best answers, but I believe that together we have a better opportunity to achieve best.
These things take time. It'll take longer than one election cycle to do this, right? So like you've got to find a way to get buy-in.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I noticed that a lot of the things that were instilled in me as either a career civil servant or a military member don't necessarily find their ways into I think the changes in administration. So what was expected of me as a military person and as a career civil servant, aren't necessarily expected of leaders in the various administration at the tops, whether they're political Republicans, whether they're political Democrats. So I'm held to a higher standard as a careerist. That's okay, but I think that there has to be some recognition that if you're serving in government, whether you're a careerist or political, your job is to achieve the mission based on the administration's priorities in a legal and ethical way that delivers the best results for the American people based on listening to the American people.
So let me ask this. And I go back to Marcus, where you talked about this attempt to reform the American government. Last attempt to reform the American government was in the 1990s. And as my students know, they're so tired of hearing my stories about the 80s and 90s when they're like, you're talking about before the internet, right? So where I'm going with this is we weren't as siloed back then, right? There was these opportunities where if you wanted to hear news, if citizens wanted to hear news or they wanted to find out what was going on from government, there were smaller, more centrist vehicles, like mainly the TV stations. But now with podcasts streaming, you can really just listen to people who say what you want to hear. And it's
Yes.
created this way more partisan aspect, political partisan aspect that's flowing into government. And where I'm going with this is, I was looking at Edelman's annual barometer, and their focus is on distrust. So bringing it back to the career senior executive, how do you navigate in a space where there is so much distrust, where you can have reform or change either at the large government-wide level or your organization level, or even within your stream, within your component, within your organization? How do you start to build trust within your work group and eventually for government? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I think as a career leader, it's incumbent on career leaders to demonstrate the behaviors that they want others to emulate. So it starts with the person that you can control, hopefully, and that's yourself. Demonstrating those values that are succinct with achieving what you would like to achieve in your role within your work unit, leading people that have been assigned to your care in terms of achieving those missions. Um, you can attempt to influence what you can, but there's certain limitations based on what you can influence. So I think the best that one can do is really being committed to trying to um, demonstrate those behaviors, those values, and those sorts of things that have been associated with the American value system as it relates to trying to fulfill what's expected of you as a career civil servant. It's atrocious at this point. I've unfollowed and unfriended so many people that, quite frankly, I used to work with on a daily basis. And now that they're most of them are retired and out of the system, they have begun to participate in a lot of the social media political debate and the ideology, and that's fine. But it's gotten to a point where some of them have really become very vicious as it relates to attacking people versus attacking principles and that sort of thing. So it's hard. One of the things that I'll stop here. One of the things that I tried to do when I was in service is I tried to not have a social media presence, and focus on the mission and the people that were in my care to achieve that mission, supporting the administration and power at the time.
Sort of happy to provide a very different perspective on it. I'd agree with everything Marcus says, especially in terms of you've sort of got this dual lens of individual and then organizational ability to build trust. And I think Marcus has spoken really eloquently on kind of that individual nature of it. I suppose if you're looking at, and this becomes relatively theoretical, I think, especially in the American context at the moment, which I won't, pretend to speak to. But certainly we're thinking about as an organization, so as an individual bit of government that people interact with, what are the things that build trust? And that's its competence, its benevolence, and its integrity. So are you good at what you're doing? Are you actually able as an organization to deliver the things that you have said that you want to deliver? So you can be a great individual leader, but if your organization is not supporting people to get into work, delivering their benefits checks, whatever the thing that people interact with you is, you're not going to start building trust. There's a delivery point in there, so that's your competence. There's your benevolence point, and just comes back to Marcus's point. Do you have the interests of the government and of the people that you're serving at heart? And are you thinking about those beyond the process. It's very easy, certainly here, to get stuck into well, this is my job and this is how I go through my process. But are you really thinking about what the real world impact is? And do you have real people's interests at heart as you're doing that? And then there's the integrity question, which again, Marcus spoke to much more eloquently than I will on the individual level. But do you have a set of standards that you're adhering to? We have a civil service code sets out integrity and needing to put public service above, personal gain at all times. There's different ways to articulate that, but there's a question about that on an organizational level and then on the individual level as well. So I think there's ways that you can conceptualize that as a leader, and there's ways you can conceptualize it both for yourself and for the teams and organizations that you're leading. You can sort of hold both of those together.
I'd like to give a very brief example. So I've never worked for the VA, the Veterans Administration, but my father, who was 100% 2 tours in Vietnam, war hero, from my perspective, received services from the VA. I too received services from the VA. So I recall a few years back, the VA had a very bad reputation based on its alleged non-responsiveness and to veterans in terms of providing health care. And so there was enough interest that sort of reigned around that issue, bipartisan interest, that there were some true systemic changes made within the VA based on prioritizing that initiative and doing it in a bipartisan way. And the VA thrived, I believe, as it relates to being able to respond and provide better care for veterans and better services. I have never had a bad experience with the VA, never. And I'm proud to say that, because I've heard so many throughout the years say that their experiences were different. I think when we identify an issue and address it in a bipartisan manner, we're in a better place to achieve the results that every person hopefully can benefit from.
So let me take what you all just said and bring it to kind of following up on what Hannah said, the competency, benevolence, and integrity of senior executives. So here in the States, on May 29th, OPM put out their new executive core qualifications for senior executives, which are rule of law and principles of America's founding, driving efficiency, merit and competence, leading people and achieving results. And on Hannah's side of the Atlantic, there's the SCS Performance Management Framework, which focuses on performance expectation setting, objective and standards, performance conversations, underperformance management, assessment, and can't read what I wrote, and reporting and consistency checks. So bringing it within the context of these simple leaders, and I say this based on what you said, Marcus, because I worked at the VA during the time when when the hospital side was really where people were dying because they weren't getting care from the VA. And Hannah, you talked about the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and I actually heard a podcast with him where he talked about his life philosophy. Like, he's a first generation everything. Parent, I believe his father worked in a steel mill, maybe something. Correct me if I'm wrong.
He was a tool maker.
Yes. But in the podcast, he talked about before he became the British PM, Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, he was probably the U.S. equivalent of the Attorney General, correct?
The Director of Public Prosecutions, yeah.
Yes.
A civil
and he said he went out to every regional office in the UK and would meet with whoever the director, the career civil servant was. But then he asked to meet with the staff without the leaders. And he asked them 2 questions. What is the one thing we need to do to make your job better? And when was the last time your supervisor actually thanked you? Right? And if you look at this understanding, this level of care, bringing it back to both sets of performance, reform, and competency, it seems like being emotionally intelligent, caring for people, caring for citizens is important to anybody's life experience, any work experience. How do we incorporate that in? Because in both sets of the management framework and the new ECQs, we haven't focused on this caring for people, emotional intelligence, the things that build trust. So the question I have is, what can we do better in regards to senior executive reform that would have that impact? I'm going to pick on Hannah. Hannah, you go first.
That seems fair. You're testing my knowledge on Keir Starmer, but that sounds about right. Yeah. I was reading just on a side note, I was reading a biography of his by Tom Baldwin. That's very interesting. And just in that, it's fascinating to me that we have a prime minister here who was a career civil servant, right? Was a very senior civil servant as a director of public prosecutions, and who turned around the Crown Prosecution Service and made it much, much more effective. And he talks about it quite openly. He was on our Institute for Government podcast talking about that and how that's made him want to do public service reform, and yet we're still slightly stalling. But
I need you to get him over here for Key for Zoom,
I'm sure. I think, just coming back to your question, two broad things from my perspective. One is culture, which is easy and is broad, but is huge, and I think drives so much of what happens in Whitehall. And the second is incentives, in terms of what you're able to reward people for. And this is what we have a real struggle with here. And I guess I can talk a bit from personal experience, right? I've seen inside the civil service good leaders and good managers who have high, not just high emotional intelligence, but who look after their teams. And who get the most out of their teams while doing that. But they're having to work against the grain of what they would otherwise be rewarded for. You see that it's not actually necessarily that great for their careers, because they're not able to spend their time getting lots of FaceTime with ministers, which is a really big, important thing in our system. That they, credit their teams first, as good leaders often do, and actually start to miss out a bit. But also, I think there's two other structural things that really exacerbate this culture that slightly overlooks good emotionally intelligent management and leadership. One is that it's hard to reward those good leaders. You don't really have many actual tools at your disposal. Let's say you're leading a department as a career civil servant, and the person you're managing is a great leader, and you're looking at them and you're saying you're doing everything you can to look after your team and you're doing a really good job here. You can't give them a pay rise. You can't really give them a meaningful bonus. You can't help them move up the career ladder in any sort of meaningful way. Your hands are pretty tied in terms of really rewarding people. But then on the flip side, and I think this is one of the things that I think is good about the new performance management framework that came out over here. New. It's a bit of a tweak. It's not a big change. Is they're trying to make it a bit easier to tackle poor performance. Now, I don't want to get into this, a way of talking that implies that, 3/4 of the civil service are poor performers. They're not. But there are poor performers in the civil service. And over here, we're very bad at tackling them. It's actually much easier if you're a leader to allow a poor performer to shuffle around, to move to another department, to get promoted out of your team, to sort of leave them there languishing on. It's very hard to move someone out of the civil service, and there's certainly a cultural sense that it's almost impossible to do so. So you're setting up some incentives where you're not rewarded culturally for being an excellent leader in terms of looking after your people. You're not rewarded kind of financially on any other hard terms for doing it. And you've got sort of one hand tied behind your back because you can't shed some of the poor performers. So there's a lot of that kind of building into the culture there in terms of leadership.
Marcus, let me add a little flavor for your aspect of the question, right? I believe it was last week we had the memo came out about the forced distribution of ratings for senior executives. But to get to what Hannah says, when I worked in federal government doing employee engagement, I would hear horror stories about senior executives, right? Now, I also heard stories of amazing senior executives who are just becoming more and more frustrated. So I guess my question for you is, when you looked at this, when you factor in this force distribution rating, and I believe you were quoted in the Federal News Network article on that, how would you deal with rewarding those amazing performers and holding the poorer performers accountable at the SES level?
That's an interesting question, and it's sort of
It's not exactly what's in the soup.
exactly, because in my mind, the systems that are designed are typically um, workable. They can achieve what's been expected of them. It's when we sprinkle in the people into the system where the system becomes the thing that needs to be changed versus the people and the culture and setting the tone for the use of the system. So as far as force distributions, I've read that book before. I participated in that play, and another administration came along, and a new system was put in place. I participated in that system. I read the book, and then another administration came in with all the answers. So again, to my point, and my original point, there is no perfect system um, that will be able to achieve, I think, the outcomes that folks desire as it relates to holding their civil servants accountable and actually rewarding them based on their performances. I think the best that we can do is focus on putting in place performance plans that have measurable goals, objectives, and so forth. Having those upfront conversations with those between raters and ratees to clearly show what is expected to achieve various ratings, and then having another conversation along the way and holding them accountable to what has been agreed upon in terms of those performance plans and what's articulated in those performance plans. So I think most people, if they're measurable, they're smart related objectives, most people can take a list of what was achieved during the year, lay it down against what the objectives that were illustrated to achieve level fours and five, threes, fours, and fives, and make a determination. It's that simple. But you have to have the backing from your raters, that when you make the tough call, your bosses, that when you make the tough call, that they're going to support you, and they're not going, to Hannah's point, cower down and look the other way, because it may result in an EEO complaint or an administrative grievance or something to that nature. So I think, again, forced distribution in my mind is not the way to achieve what the mutual desired results are. At the end of the day, you're still going to have some people that are happy, and you're going to have some people that are pissed off. Some people may deserve to be pissed off because it just wasn't their time to receive the higher rating, because it was Bob's time, because we're going to reward you next year if you just remain silent this year. So to me, this forced distribution system decentivizes um, um, people to perform their best, because at the end of the day, if they do it, if they're not within that 30%, then they're not going to be rewarded, either um, either monetarily or just through their rating.
So I think the one thing I would add, and we're going to move to the Q&A section, is the space I see it from. A lot of times it comes to training people once they become supervisors and leaders. But I think from a talent management standpoint, uh, looking, finding a way to determine whether someone is benevolent during the interview process can help to alleviate some things as opposed to trying to address underperforming on the back end. So here's what we're going to do.
Russ,
Give you a time check. Yes.
can I make one comment because I want to get this out.
You can do it in 30 seconds.
I can do it in 30 seconds. So my advice to career civil servants right now would be to respect others and yourself, and focus on service before self-interest. Be curious, seeking to understand and listening more, talking less. Be empathetic as you attempt to achieve agency missions. I think if you demonstrate those values, you can't go wrong.
Awesome. So here's what we're going to do. Let me time check for everybody. We're going to go and move into the Q&A section. We try to get to all questions that are asked. For those who have a hard stop at the top of the hour, we will stop. If you can stay on, we'll do like Trevor Noah and do a between the scenes, and we'll continue to answer whatever questions we do not get to between myself, Hannah, and Marcus. We'll distribute the answers and get them back to you when we put out the on-demand version of this. First up, and I think this is steered towards you, Marcus, with agencies not wanting to add GS 14s and 15s, what justifies the need for SESs, let alone new SESs, for us to want to pursue these positions? Why would someone want to be in the senior executive or senior civil service?
My personal philosophy, then, I want to have an opportunity to help shape the game, right? So, so I think there's a big sector of folks that it's just within their DNA to attempt to gravitate to those roles that will help them help define the system, help determine the sustainability of the system, that sort of thing. I think that it's a personal decision, whether or not you're willing to share your talents that may align with those senior roles that need to be performed and have to be performed in order to achieve these important missions. Whether or not you are wedded enough to put yourself in a position to hopefully be in one of those roles where you can hopefully help determine the destination of the organization. That's gonna require a lot of wear and tear. I can tell you right now, I was a lot better looking and a lot healthier when I started out. But I'm very satisfied in terms of what I've personally been able to contribute to the system. I hope there are a lot of other folks out there that have sort of the same perspective as it relates to why it's important to step up.
Hannah, you want to add something to this?
There's a whole variety of reasons why you might want to be a senior civil servant or a public servant, but if at the core of it, you can spend your time doing something meaningful that might deliver for the public, that feels like a good reason as any.
So let me follow up on something you said, Marcus, and I wanted to get to it before we got to the Q&A. When I look at the reform documents on both sides, and I look at where we are from a culture standpoint worldwide within government, without definitely talking to some of my GS 14, 15, and SES students here, this ability to manage mental health and well-being is huge. Whether I had a student who lost most of her staff through DRP, and then she still has to deliver, and it's causing anxiety and wellness issues. So any thoughts on how senior executives can protect their peace and maintain their mental health and well-being during this and other challenging times?
I think you have to put your mask on first, in order to make sure you have a great air supply before you help others. So I think this is one of these areas where you have to be selfish as a career executive and focus on your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being, and make no excuses for not doing it. And so I think that those work-life balance mantras that people expound but don't necessarily practice. I think that you have to embrace that as a leader and be susceptible to criticism for doing it, because at the end of the day, you'll be around where a lot of aren't, because they've been consumed by the mission. I have witnessed many that have not been able to manage that within themselves and others. And quite frankly, and I tear up when I think about this, I'm thinking about one that was my deputy that's no longer here today, who literally passed away while still serving at a very young age. Quite frankly, I think that we're going to see more of those experiences than not, if the federal government and the American people don't necessarily prioritize, provide resources, and focus on addressing mental healthness and health, well, mental healthness and wealth, whether you're within the federal system or just a person navigating the world. And we see it on a daily basis. We have got to focus on helping people that need that type help.
Hannah, your thoughts on mental health and well-being in the workspace?
I mean, Marcus has put it very eloquently. I think I will add an anecdote, which is that I worked through the pandemic here, right at the center of government during COVID. I saw quite a few people burn out. I was one of them, and ended up taking some time out afterwards. And as I came back into work, just had a very, very interesting talk from someone who used to lead some of our crisis response work. And she said, and it's really stuck with me, that every time, this was a woman who ran crisis after crisis after crisis. And she said, well, listen, whenever a crisis hits, the first thing I do is I make sure that someone is in charge of a rota. And then I send half of my staff home, because there's no world in which they're not going to need to come back in, and I need half rested. And everybody wants to sort of run towards the ball and the thing that is the ball that's been thrown around, the house that's on fire, whatever it is. People want to run towards the thing. And there's a sense at which you need good leadership, both for yourself, as Marcus says, look after yourself first, but you can look after your teams as well. And you can say, no, right, half of you are out. We're gonna put in place some structural things that'll support some of that well-being as well. So that rings up with me to that chat.
And Russell, think about it. The CDC shooting in Atlanta. I heard, I think it was 180 rounds that went into that building, and based on allegedly a political ideology that was spewed. You had people in that building. The police officer that responded is no longer with us. Have you heard anything about that further this week? Did you hear anything about that last week? Has anybody talked about the people that were working in that building and what's happening regarding those people returning to work, getting the care that they need, so forth and so on? I haven't heard any of that, and I haven't seen it in social media. I haven't heard it in the media. But I have talked to some people that were a part of that, but they've been lost, and because we went to the next thing that would sell attention based on social media, or the next political piece.
Next question. Curious to hear perspectives on how performance management systems need to reform and how assessing performance has changed along with the new competencies. Let's see. My hypothesis is, along with greater complexity, et cetera, comes less direct action to outcomes, becomes also less individualized. How do we account for that if there's agreement, share different perspectives if not? So let me go back to the original question. Hear perspectives on how performance management systems need to reform and how assessing performance has changed with the new competencies. Y'all want me to go first?
Yes.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, so I think, right. So I believe, let me put on, this is the opinion of Russell Robinson. I don't have data to back it up. There really is no such thing as merit, right? Especially when it comes to ratings. It's all subjective.
and we are in the opinion business. So what I have seen in my when I was in the civil service for 22 years, there was never any training in regards to go with rating system changes, right? And I remember I was talking to a chief learning officer, and I'd said, listen, whether it's a 5-point rating scale, a 3-point rating scale, or a 10-point rating scale, if I built trust with my team and with my direct supervisor, then the rating scale doesn't matter, right? Because I know I am going to be treated fairly. There will be no surprise. I may not agree, but there will not be surprises. There will be feedback. There will be check-ins. There'll be feedback at the individual and group level. When there is not trust, then the ratings do not matter. When it gets to the competencies, I can take the political aspect out of it and say, yeah, they're really, it's still the same thing over and over again, but we haven't focused on the corresponding training, like how you rate people, or if you know that there's going to be a misalignment between what someone would rate themselves and how you would rate them as an executive. Have you provided data to make your case? That level of training has never happened. So we get these new competencies, but it's still the same people coming up with the same kind of flawed process for coming up with their opinions.
I love that response, and I love the question. I mean, because quite frankly, I think Marcus Hill is at a point where I wish that they would just scrap the whole thing, right? I was a big fan of the pass fail system. Either you passed or you didn't pass, right? It's just that simple. We know, we have a performance plan, we have goals, we have objectives, and we know what passing looks like. We know where not passing looks like. So we rate people on those two things. Then we're given a pot of money to recognize those that have achieved certain things that can describe measurably these things, and we take that and we try to recognize those that have achieved those things with a pot of money, and then we move on to the next year. But this 4, 5, 3, um, you know, I would recommend just scrapping it. Even with the executive competencies, yeah, the 5 that were in place, they were outdated, but they had merit. The ones that had been added, they have merit. But at the end of the day, it comes down to achieving desired outcomes, and I think doing it in a way that does not necessarily, kill, destroy people and systems along the way. But to me, I think we need to focus on keeping it simple.
Hannah, did you want to add on to that, or do you want to take the next mysterious question?
Oh, I'll roll the dice.
Okay. So we'll say SES in parentheses SCS reform sounds like an ominous task. I'm curious on the intent behind these initiatives. What are the tenets of dissatisfactions with senior executives specifically?
So obviously we'll talk to the English dissatisfaction at the moment, or the UK dissatisfaction. That really, and it's quite an interesting one because it's not one that we hear all the time, and it's twofold. One is this levers thing. I pull my lever and things don't happen. Like the civil service cannot deliver things on the ground for me, and that is it's become a particularly salient point in our politics at the moment. So it really matters if you've got a government that is doing things that individual voters feel the difference on. So we've got these 5 missions. They've got some pretty clear milestones. So it's an interesting thing to look at if you haven't yet, this idea of, mission-driven government, these 5 missions, the milestones that the government has set out, which include things like the percentage of children that will be school ready by the age of 5 going up to a specific target of 75%. The halving the amount of knife crime, for example. So quite specific things that people should be able to feel. There's a problem there in that actually levels of crime are often quite disconnected from how much crime people think there is on the streets, certainly in the UK. We tend to think there's much higher levels of crime than there actually is. So there's the pulling the lever question. The other frustration that we're really hearing at the moment is about a lack of, we don't have a good word for it, a lack of dynamism, a lack of creativity, a lack of kind of enthusiastically getting with the new program. So we've had a Conservative government for 14 years. Remember that all of our civil service stays in post. We just get new ministers on top, and a couple of special advisors, but they're talking 2 or 3 in each department. So really, it's all people who were serving that last Conservative government for 14 years. A new Labour government comes in, and there's a real sense that the civil service isn't with the program, isn't coming up with these new ideas, isn't able to do this big blue sky thinking and to come up with really radical policy ideas, not even civil service reform ideas, but that we're so trapped in kind of the status quo and the usual ways of doing things that we can't serve a more radical government. So I think those are the two major frustrations at the moment. It focuses on senior civil service because those are the people that you're mainly interacting with as a minister on our side. But obviously it needs to feed down, and you'll have slightly different requirements. We would expect our senior civil service to be able to bring some of that creative policy making in a way that we might not expect more junior civil servants to do. So that's us.
All right, Marcus, I'm excited to see which direction you go with this one, man.
Well, I'm going to ask you to ask the question one more time.
Yes. What do you think? SES reform sounds like quite an ominous task. I'm curious on the intent behind the proposals recently. What are the tenets of dissatisfaction with the SESs?
So I think I think the intent of these recent reforms and changes is to attempt to satisfy the political entity. It's in the interest of the American people to have a government that is carrying out and fulfilling the missions of these agencies, and those people that are core to that are competent, they're capable, they're qualified, and all of those things. And by the way, with the caveat that they bring all of those things to bear in support of the priorities of the administration serving at the time. So they're the base, and they're there to serve the will and pleasure of the politicians as well as the American people. But I think that where we are currently is that there is a distrust in the entire cadre of career civil servants. And again, I think that that's dangerous, because I think what happens is that, and we're experiencing it now, where we've eradicated, or there's been an eradication of many qualified, capable, committed careerists that are essential to ensure that we're able to deliver, those missions and services on the behalf of all of the American public, not just a certain sector.
And see, I think it's a two-part thing, right?
Yeah.
Let me put on my public administrator hat, and I'm teaching my intro to public administration. The way federal government was built, especially after the Civil War, there was this intentionality from Woodrow Wilson, who, to be honest, I am not a big fan of. He was the father of public administration. Between Woodrow Wilson and Andrew Johnson, you could have an argument to which president was the most racist. And both of their camps would say their person was the most racist. But he was very clear about civil service was really supposed to be devoid of politics. So it could not be navigate within a whim, right? Federal government is like a 3,000-mile cruise ship, right? It's not built to change directions very quickly. So on one hand, you have this belief that the lack of politicization is hindering the ability of a party to move in the direction it wants, right? And to be fair, if you go back probably to Ronald Reagan, for the three branches of government, the executive branch has always tried to increase its power, no matter which president was in office. Now it's just kind of on steroids. So that's the political aspect. The second aspect of it is, I don't know for the person who asked the question whether there's dissatisfaction with the SES. As times change, things start to evolve. So if you look at the last round of ECQs in the States in 2012, well, that was before AI. That was before Amazon really took off with supply chain management. And we're looking at an aspect where there's an even younger generation coming into the workforce. Their needs and wants from the government workforce is going to be different, and that's going to require different skill sets of those going into the senior executive cadre. Any thoughts or follow up before we move to the next question?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, literally, I think that you know, even the new ECQs that have been presented, I think you've got to do. I think there has to be a deeper dive because into the system, because of the way the system is designed. I reach a certain grade level, then I can apply for consideration, and then I literally write to these ECQs, hopefully demonstrating my practical experience as it relates to those ECQs, and then somebody reads what I write and says, okay, it matches with the ECQ, so you're in. So I think that I think it has to go beyond that. I think about, and I'll be brief. I started out as a GS2, which is one level higher than a GS1 file clerk when I started my civil service career. And I hit every rung in the organization. I was a student. I was a clerk. I hit all these things: manager, practitioner, supervisor, manager, and all of that was of value. And so I think it helped me to understand the inner workings, so forth and so on, and be an attribute to politicals and others that were coming in trying to launch their priorities, and being able to rely on someone like myself and others that had knowledge of the inner workings and could give those folks an inside peek at what they probably need to focus on. To you all's conversation earlier about the gentleman that asked the others to walk out of the room while he talked to their employees and asked them those two questions. I used to do that along with the gentleman that I mentioned that passed away all the time. We used to uninvite the supervisors and managers to certain meetings and meet with the line folks. And we got so many great solutions that we were able to implement, and the organization was better from it because we cut out that layer of discussion and went directly to the people doing the work.
Okay, so Marcus, you ended up with talking about Keir Starmer's thing about I want to talk to the people without their supervisors, right? And as a employee engagement, employee voice researcher, what I see is this move towards silencing the voice of civil servants, right? Especially speaking on my side of the Atlantic. So this brings up this fantastic question. Is there a way for senior executives to have their opinions regarding things that impact their employees heard? It's seeming that leadership across government has to walk a thin line and cannot say that they are in support of their employees that are struggling in the new climate.
That's a tough one. Theoretically, the career senior executive should be able to have a conversation with their political leader and literally seek to understand what their goals are, their aspirations, their desires to achieve, and those sorts of things. Take that in, and then come back and kind of share how they believe, the careerist believes, that they can assist the political in terms of achieving those things. And then also as a part of that discussion, share some thoughts as it relates to things that probably should be agreed to or recognized as it relates to the political's team achieving what the political person desires. To me, that should be the way it operates. But I'm hearing, that's not necessarily the case in all areas these days, and that makes it very challenging. So I think again, it goes back to doing the best that you can as it relates to engaging with your political person, leader, trying to demonstrate and address how you and your team can be of value as it relates to achieving those priorities, and hopefully demonstrate through actions some things that cause your political to say, you know what, wow, they were able to do this, or wow, I see that they're supporting, and get that trust established to be able to both move forward together.
So, Hannah, how free would executives be to articulate their voice uh, in regards to their political climate, especially when you spent 14 years under one party and now you've had this shift?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, in some ways, the politics side of it is the kind of policy and politics side of it is fairly clear, right? You're an impartial civil service. You do not express political views, and you've got as an individual civil servant, you've got to find a way to be comfortable with that and be comfortable with serving the government of the day. And civil servants, vast majority of civil servants come into the civil service knowing that and doing that. The really interesting contested space is on the workforce management question, right? Where is this an issue where your top civil servant, for us, our permanent secretaries, our top civil servants in each department, where is the workforce that's a workforce management issue for them to manage? And where does it start to clash with the political views that their minister holds? And that's the space that we certainly haven't figured it out yet. As with so many things in Britain, we've decided not to write it down and hope that maybe we can sort of fudge it like that. Right, where you've got a good relationship, as Marcus has set out, between that top civil servant and that political appointee. And most of the time you do, and you've got that partnership, and there's a bit of tension in it, but it works. And then there's times where it can really start to break down and not function. And a lot of that, again, is about rebuilding the personal relationship, but we definitely haven't figured this one out.
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
personal
and
space.
I think from where I see it, especially for that senior executive, you're really caught in two positions, right? You have the power of voice going down to the people under your span of control. And based on values, you can make that. I think you have to continue to make that happen. How you do that going up is where the challenge is, and how you do that in a way where, as that leader, you can maintain your dignity, your sanity, and your wellness is where the frustration changes, and where the frustration happens. Uh, and I know in some contexts, it gets to how do you explain what's important to you and the team in a way that resonates with that senior executive, assuming that they care to listen. All right. Assuming they care to listen, how can you make your case in a way that's important to them? And it really comes to how do you build that connection if you can. But
And
sometimes that's not the case.
you think about it, what's happened in the United States federal civil service system since January the 20th. You have a cadre of people that were serving in certain positions that were carrying out the former administration's priorities, who received a notice via email that their services were no longer required. Some of them had decades of service within the civil service. serving multiple administrations, bipartisan administrations. Others, some of them were even acknowledged for the great work that they did in the previous Trump administration.
So it's fascinating you say that. So at Key, we're getting ready to start to do some qualitative research where we talk to senior executives who took the deferred resignation program or the voluntary early retirement action. And I'm saying it out instead of using the acronyms because Hannah's here. Uh, but when we started the pre-conversation with them, very little was, I don't have enough money saved up for retirement. Some a little bit, but it's always like, I can get another job. The biggest challenges we're seeing is I don't really know what my purpose is now, or I did this for 35 years and I didn't get to leave on my terms and I wasn't acknowledged. And that's where the challenge is. And to be fair, we've also got those who are like, this federal time was great. I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So I think that's an interesting aspect.
Russell is from academia. He brings the academia background, and Marcus is an old country guy from Southeast Georgia that brings some practical experience. So put them all together, and you're going to have all perspectives covered to make us even stronger. Because if we didn't have one of them, we might miss a perspective that might be instrumental in us being better than we currently are. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know for me, during the first Trump administration, I was doing training and development at HHS, a component within there. And what we did was we really focused on voice. Like, our goal is for our employees to have a voice, for our customers to have a voice. And then as a leader, you have to work to bring that voice in and create that, and you've done the work to create this trusted, safe space so that that person can speak and know what they say can be heard, treated fairly, and they won't suffer any adverse impact to their work career. And then we also linked it to emotional intelligence, right? Because if you had that self-aware leader who knew my biases or prism may overshadow a solution I come up with, then I'm going to seek out different voices to come up with the best solutions. So and again, I'm a big fan of emotional intelligence, and I think if there is that and check-ins, like, those are the Swiss Army knives for leaders.